a boy who had bled out in the mud with my hands pressed to his chest. His name was Private Anthony Miller. They told me a soldier's duty was to follow orders, to fight, to survive. But what they never told me was how much weight a single folded piece of paper could carry. My name is Clarence Walker. Back then I was 20 years old, just another black private in the U.S. Army 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers. Italy, 1944. The newspapers back home wrote about how we were liberating Europe, but they didn't write much about us. About men like me. Men who wore the same uniform, carried the same rifle, but weren't treated the same when the fighting stopped. I carried a letter in my breast pocket written in the cramped dark of a bombed-out farmhouse. Not to a general, not to a commander, but to the family of a boy in my squad. A boy who had bled out in the mud with my hands pressed to his chest. His name was Private Anthony Miller, 19 years old, from Ohio. He died calling for his mother. That night, after we buried him shallow in the Italian soil, I wrote the words his mother deserved to read. That he had been brave, that he wasn't alone, that his last breath wasn't just pain, it was remembered. I promised myself I'd hand her that letter when the war was over. But I never did, because the war had a way of burying more than bodies. It buried promises, it buried truths, and sometimes it buried the courage to speak when the world was already deaf to your voice. And so that letter stayed folded, stained with dirt and sweat, carried with me through battles, through winters, through years. A letter I never delivered, and still regret. Before I take you further into this story, before I tell you why that letter still haunts me, I need to ask you something. If you've been listening, if these stories matter to you, then subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below, because memory is fragile and history has a way of forgetting men like Anthony. And men like me. Now let me take you back to the valley where Anthony fell and where that letter was first written in blood and silence. The valley was quiet when we marched in, but quiet in war never lasts. It was late autumn in Italy. The vineyards were bare, the hills scarred by shell fire. Mud clung to our boots, thick as guilt. Our platoon had been ordered to push forward and probe the enemy's line, see if the Germans were digging in. They called it reconnaissance. To us, it felt like walking blindfolded into a wolf's den. Anthony Miller walked beside me that day. He was young, too young, but war didn't care about age. He carried his rifle like it was too heavy, but his eyes carried a kind of fire I hadn't seen in many men, black or white. He told me once he wanted to be a teacher when the war was over. Kids ought to learn the truth, he said, not just the pretty parts they put in the history books. We were ghosts moving through the valley, rifles at the ready, every sound magnified, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the crunch of our own footsteps. And then, like thunder out of nowhere, the hillside erupted. Machine guns, mortars, screams. We hit the dirt, scrambling for cover behind a stone wall already cracked by shell fire. Bullets chewed the earth inches from our heads. The air filled with dust and the metallic taste of fear. Orders were shouted, barely heard over the roar. We fired back, blind at first, then with precision when shadows moved on the ridge. That's when Anthony fell. A burst of machine gun fire stitched the wall and one round found him. He dropped, his rifle clattering against the stone. I was on him in an instant, pressing my hands to the wound in his chest, whispering, "Stay with me, Miller. Stay with me." His eyes locked on mine, wide, scared, and so damn young. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a name, Mama, and then nothing. His chest stilled. His fire went out. I sat there in the mud, bullets still snapping overhead with his blood warm on my hands. And in that moment I knew I couldn't let him vanish into silence. I couldn't let his mother hear from some cold telegram. So that night, in the dark of a ruined farmhouse, I wrote the letter. I wrote every word like it was a prayer, that he was brave, that he was loved, that he was not alone when he left this world. Words I thought would matter. Words I swore I would deliver. But the war had other plans, and that promised it slipped away like too many others. The next morning we moved out again. Orders never stop just because someone didn't make it. That's the cruelty of war. You bury your brothers in your heart and keep marching like nothing broke. I had Anthony's letter folded tight in my breast pocket, the paper damp from sweat and rain. Every step I felt it pressing against me like a second heart. I told myself when this is over, I'll send it. I owe him that much. But in the Army, especially in the 92nd Division, promises were hard to keep. Being a black unit meant we got the hardest jobs and the least recognition. If something went wrong, command blamed us. If something went right, command forgot our names. Even in the mess hall, you felt it. Separate tables, separate looks. Like the uniform didn't cover the skin underneath. That day, the valley turned bloody fast. German mortars found us as we crossed a ridge. Shells screamed down, tearing men apart. We scattered, diving into ditches, mud spraying high. I remember one white lieutenant screaming at me to get up and move, boy, like I was less than the stripes on my sleeve. I bit down the rage, swallowed it like poison. Not because he was right, but because out here, surviving meant swallowing more than bullets. We pushed through hedgerows and ruined farmhouses, trading fire every step. The world became smoke, steel, and screaming. At one point, I dragged a wounded soldier, didn't matter his color, back behind cover while bullets snapped overhead. His blood smeared my jacket, and when he looked up, his eyes went wide. "You saved me," he whispered like he couldn't believe it, like a black sergeant's hands weren't supposed to pull him from death. That night, we camped in a shattered barn. I pulled out Anthony's letter again, staring at the creases, the ink that had smudged when my hands shook. Preacher. An older soldier who always carried a Bible noticed me staring. He asked, "What's that?" I told him the truth, that it was for a mother who'd never see her boy come home, that I'd promised to deliver it. Preacher just nodded, eyes heavy. "Then you better keep it safe, 'cause promises weigh more than bullets." I folded it carefully, tucking it deeper into my jacket. But in my gut, I already feared the truth. In war, promises had a way of being buried with the men who made them. And as the fire crackled low and the cold bit deep, I wondered if I'd ever get the chance to deliver that letter, or if it would die with me in the mud. The following days bled together. Mud, smoke, gunfire, exhaustion. We fought for every yard of ground, through ruined villages where the church bells were silent and the houses burned like kindling. War had a way of stripping the world down to ash and echo. I kept Anthony's letter close, tucked in my breast pocket. At night, when the others tried to snatch a few minutes of sleep, I'd take it out, unfold it, and trace the lines with my fingers. I never read it. I didn't have to. It wasn't my words, and I wasn't the one meant to hear them. But just holding it reminded me that Anthony was more than a casualty. He was a son, a brother, a boy who'd believed the Army would make him more than just another black man in a white man's world. The racism didn't stop, not even in the mud. One afternoon, after a firefight near a stone bridge, we were low on ammo and waiting for resupply. A lieutenant from another unit swaggered over, helmet tilted back, cigarette dangling from his lips. He looked at me and said, "Surprised you boys held the line. Didn't think your kind had it in you." The words cut, sharp and deep, but I bit down hard on my tongue. I wanted to swing at him, to knock that smug grin off his face, but I couldn't. Not then, not with my men watching. I gave him nothing, just silence, because silence was sometimes the only shield we had. Later, Marcus, our youngest, barely 20, asked me why I didn't say anything, why I let the lieutenant spit on us like that. I told him the truth. "Because, son, they're already waiting for us to slip. The day we fight back with fists instead of rifles, they'll use it as proof we don't belong here." He looked down, ashamed of being angry. But I put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't bury that anger, Marcus. Use it. Let it fuel your fight. Every bullet you fire, every step you take, that's how you prove them wrong. That's how we all prove them wrong." That night, while the wind howled through the broken rafters of the farmhouse we sheltered in, I dreamed of Anthony's mama. I dreamed of walking up her front steps, hat in my hands, letter trembling in my grip. I dreamed of her face when I told her her boy wasn't coming home. And when I woke, cold sweat on my skin, I knew the truth. If I didn't survive this war, the letter would die with me. And then her boy's last words would never be heard. That thought scared me more than the bullets ever could. The offensive pushed us deeper into the forest, where every tree felt like it held a rifle aimed at our backs. Supplies ran thin. Some days the only warmth we had was the heat from the barrels of our rifles after a firefight. Hunger gnawed at us, exhaustion dragged our feet, but we kept moving. Orders didn't pause for tired men. It was during one of those marches that the letter nearly slipped from me. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking us through, turning the road to a river of mud. We staggered forward, boots sucking at the earth with every step. I stumbled, my pack tearing open against a jagged root. Rations, ammo, and Anthony's folded envelope spilled into the muck. For a second, panic gripped me harder than any ambush ever had. I dropped to my knees, hands scrambling through the mud until I found it. Creased, damp, edges curling but still whole. Preacher Jenkins, the oldest among us, crouched beside me and helped scoop my gear back into the bag. He saw the letter in my hand, his eyes narrowing. "You carryin' words that ain't yours," he said, voice low enough so the others wouldn't hear. I didn't answer right away. Rain dripped from the brim of my helmet, masking the sweat on my face. "It's his," I said finally, "and it's gotta get home." Preacher gave a slow nod, but there was something heavy in his eyes. "Then don't let this war eat it, or you." That night, while the rain still hammered the tin roof of the barn we'd holed up in, Marcus asked me about home. He was too young to hide the tremor in his voice. "Sarge, you think they'll ever look at us the same? After all this?" I thought of Anthony. I thought of the letter pressed against my chest like an extra rib, and I thought of the lieutenant at the bridge, his smirk when he doubted us. "No," I said, honest and raw. "Not the same. But maybe better. Maybe they'll see we bled just the same. Maybe they'll finally see we belonged here all along." Marcus looked away, jaw tight. I knew he didn't believe me. Hell, I wasn't sure I believed me either. But in that moment, I made a silent vow. If I couldn't promise these boys a world that welcomed them home, I could damn well promise that Anthony's last words would reach his mama. That letter would outlive me if nothing else did. And so I tucked it back into my pocket, close to my heart, and prayed the war wouldn't claim it before its journey was complete. The Ardennes didn't care about promises. Snow fell heavy, blanketing the ground in silence, but beneath it the war was alive, always shifting, always waiting. We were ordered to dig in near a crossroads, thin defenses against an enemy we all knew was stronger. That night the cold was unbearable. Breath froze on our scarves, fingers stiffened even inside gloves. Men huddled together for warmth, rifles laid across their laps like second spines. The silence was broken only by the distant rumble of artillery, German guns pounding some other poor unit into the dirt. I pulled Anthony's letter from my jacket and read the outside by the dim glow of a candle stub. His handwriting was uneven, rushed, smudged where sweat or tears had touched the page. I didn't open it, I never did, but just holding it steadied me. Like his spirit was still here, watching over us. Marcus noticed. "You carry that thing like it's holy," he said softly. "It is," I told him. "These words, they're the last of him. That means they're worth more than anything in this frozen hell." Before he could answer, the night cracked open. Mortar shells screamed in, blasting snow and earth into the air. Men shouted, diving for cover. The first explosion tore through the foxholes at the edge of our line, flinging bodies like rag dolls. Then came the machine guns, their tracers red slashes against the snow. "Positions!" I roared, my voice raw against the chaos. Marcus scrambled to the gun, Wilson fed the ammo belt, and Preacher clutched the radio handset, trying desperately to reach command through the static. Bullets ripped into the timber around us, splinters flying like knives. One of our boys went down hard, his scream muffled by the snow. I dragged him back, blood already soaking his parka, while Marcus's gun barked fire into the dark. Through it all, the letter was still pressed against my chest. I could feel it crinkle every time I moved, a fragile reminder that survival wasn't just about me. It was about carrying Anthony's last words through hell itself. As the attack raged, I swore under my breath, I will not let this letter die here, even if it means I don't walk out myself. The firefight turned the snow into mud and blood. Our line buckled but didn't break. Marcus fired until the barrel smoked, his face locked in grim determination. Wilson shouted curses with every belt he fed through the gun. Preacher, hunched low over the radio, was practically screaming into the handset. "Command, this is Panther 1. We're under heavy assault, grid 432. We can't hold much longer." Static. Then faint. "Hold your ground. Reinforcements en route." We'd heard it before. Sometimes they came. Sometimes they didn't. Another mortar landed close. Too close. The blast hurled me onto my back, ears ringing, snow raining down. When I scrambled up, I saw one of my boys, Private Ellis, sprawled out, his chest ripped open. His blood spread fast across the white snow, turning it black in the moonlight. His eyes locked onto mine, wide and terrified. "Tell my mom," he rasped. But the words broke off. His head slumped back and he was gone. For a moment, everything else blurred, the gunfire, the shouting, even the cold. All I could see was Ellis, another son who'd never make it home. Another family who'd never know the whole story. Another letter that would never be written. And then through the haze of grief and fury, the thought hit me like ice in the chest. Anthony's letter, still pressed against my heart, still waiting. If I fell here, it would be buried with me, lost forever. His last words silenced by the same snow that was silencing Ellis right now. I grabbed the letter, pressed it hard against my chest, and I swore again, louder this time, a growl lost in the roar of gunfire. "They will not bury this with me." Rage steadied me. I threw myself back into the fight, firing into the dark, shouting orders, dragging the living back into cover. If the Germans wanted to take us, they'd have to claw us out inch by inch. Because this wasn't just survival anymore, this was a promise. Dawn broke pale and gray over a battlefield that looked more like a graveyard. The snow was churned with mud, blood, and twisted metal. Bodies lay where they'd fallen, American and German alike, frozen in the same silence. We had held. Barely. Reinforcements finally arrived as the shooting faded, pushing the enemy back into the tree line. The relief on the fresh men's faces turned to horror when they saw what was left of us. From a platoon, fewer than a dozen still stood. Marcus sat slumped against a tree stump, hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. His helmet was gone, his hair matted with blood. He looked at me and then at the envelope I was clutching like a weapon. "You still got it, huh?" "Yeah," I whispered, voice raw. I still got it. I stared at the letter for a long time. Anthony's words, sealed away, waiting for the day they'd reach his mother, waiting for me to keep my promise. Through mud, snow, gunfire, and death, I'd carried it. And I realized then that maybe that was my purpose all along. Not medals, not glory, just this. Weeks later, when the war moved on and I found myself back stateside, I made the walk up a quiet street in Georgia. My uniform was faded, my body thinner, but my heart pounded heavier than any battle as I knocked on the door. An older woman answered, Anthony's mother. She looked at me with tired eyes that had already seen too much loss. I didn't have words for her. None would be enough, so I simply held out the envelope. Her hands trembled as she took it, as if she already knew what it contained. Her tears came before she even opened it. Mine weren't far behind. That letter wasn't just Anthony's last words, it was proof that he lived, that he mattered, that his voice still reached home despite everything this war tried to bury. And for me it was a reminder that sometimes the smallest promises, the ones no one else will ever know, are the ones that keep you alive. If his story moved you, if it reminded you of the unseen sacrifices carried on the shoulders of soldiers who never made it back, then I ask you to honor it. Subscribe to this channel, share these stories, and help keep their voices alive. Because history isn't just dates and battles. It's men like Anthony, it's letters like his, and it's promises we can't afford to forget.